Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. Thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. We're free and we're available on all platforms. Today, I have a very special guest. Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette and Colorado Springs Gazette is here. Help talk some Nuggets, introduce him to the audience, make sure that folks know and follow Vinny. Make sure that you do follow Vinny because his coverage is absolutely terrific. It's great to have more than one beat writer on the beat at a time, which has been rare in my time in Denver. You can follow him on Twitter at V Benedetto. That's BEN1NED1DETTO. So BEDETTO. Vinny, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, you've been on the beat for a while, but I haven't had you on yet. When did you actually start covering the Nuggets?
That is a very good question. So it started long before the Denver Gazette was a thing, that launched probably a year, 18 months ago. But they used to send me up for playoff games. Like I remember, probably 2019 playoffs, the Spurs and Trailblazers series. So they would send me up for home games just to my boss knew it was something I would really enjoy doing. So he would kind of just throw me a bone and give me a credential for the night and send me up. And then it kind of started in earnest during the pandemic when I was covering, high school sports down in the Springs and Colorado Springs switchbacks. But, when all of that got shut down and it was like the bubble was happening and not much else was, and I could cover it remotely on Zoom, it just kind of started from there. And then when the Denver Gazette actually launched and was like hiring people, I went to my boss and it was just like, this is something I'd love to do. And they were nice enough and kind enough to let me do it. So I guess that's the quick version.
So how long have you been covering sports? Like how long have you been a sports reporter?
I started, I guess, professionally in 2010 in Omaha. I was covering, actually, it was Doug McDermott's Creighton teams for a few years.
Yeah.
So if someone follows along and is confused by all the Creighton likes that end up in the timeline, that's the reason for it. So I started there in 2010. Got my first full-time newspaper gig in 2014 in a small town called Gothenburg, Nebraska.
That's crazy. My wife used to live in Gothenburg. No kidding.
Way.
No kidding. She's got family there. That's wild.
It is incredible. But I always kind of preferred bigger city, more offerings. Gothenburg was kind of tough for me personally, but then I went to Hayes, Kansas. They got a Division II university there, covered some sports there, and then moved out to Colorado Springs in 2017.
Nice.
Yep.
You've done the whole trek. So I always like to ask this from journalists that have done, I call it the hump. Like you're humping around various cities doing the high school and stuff like that. What strikes you the most about the difference between covering high school sports and pro sports? Not from obviously the competition is a little bit different, but just from the process of journalism and how you approach finding and writing about stories.
Yeah, it's much different in terms of high school. You can just like walk up to an athletic director or coach and be like, hey, what's this kid like? And they will tell you his life story, the good, the bad. It's kind of all out there. And people are just, generally more excited to talk to you.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
When they're high school kids or Division II athletes. So that is something I miss, just in terms of they'll give you all the time in the world, and they'll, share every detail of their story. And so it's different. It's much easier in terms of just walking up and talking to people and getting most everything you need from right there. You have to do a little more digging and a little more preparation.
There are layers that you have to get through in the NBA. You got to get through PR, and then you got to get through the player, and then you got to actually build a relationship. And that's all been very difficult, especially during the pandemic. Like that's been one of the crazy challenges is, the NFL announced basically that they're going to return locker room access. And Silver was pretty adamant at All-Star about, I don't know if we're going to be doing that, or if we're going to be returning to that. I personally don't have a lot of optimism for that returning for a number of reasons, including Silver's comments. But I do think, look, it's incredibly helpful for us to get back in the locker room, to build those relationships, to have those kind of comments, to get a better sense of who these players are as people. But it's I think it's going to be tough. I'm hopeful maybe they'll come up with some sort of like middle ground experiment. So, okay. So you started covering the Nuggets, 2019 ish, pretty good start to start covering them with the first ever playoff run. What's been like what's the most you've put into a story since you started on the beat in 2019?
It was probably the Bones Highland. I wrote as many people did,
Yeah,
a Bones Highland feature.
Yes.
At the beginning of the season, I went back and talked to his high school coach and talked to his coach at VCU as well, and then just kind of amassed all of the Bones interviews from draft night throughout summer league into preseason stuff, and just kind of pieced that all together into something that I'm proud of it. I think I will hopefully have better stuff continuing to come as I get to develop more of these relationships. But yeah, that is probably as far as I've dug in on something.
What was your big takeaway? You kind of like walked away from knowing about him that maybe Nuggets fans would be surprised at.
You kind of froze up there for a second. Can you just repeat that real quick?
Sure. I said, when you look at that feature, what was the thing that you learned about Bones that you think most Nuggets fans would be surprised to know about him? Like, what was the personality trait? Because we haven't gotten to talk to him enough. I know like what he presents himself as. I'm curious if you found anything that you were like, people probably don't realize that he is X.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the obvious part is obviously he's got that huge personality, and everyone I talked to made it sound like that is real and it's legit, and that's just who he is on a pretty consistent basis. But I guess the thing I'd say is maybe we don't appreciate enough is that, like, and Malone says this quite a bit, is that he's just kind of like, he's a hooper, like,
yeah,
spends all sorts of time in the gym, and like you don't get that kind of handle and that burst and obviously the range without just living in the gym and kind of being obsessed with your craft. And I think that's something that we don't maybe appreciate enough, because it's so easy just to get wrapped up in he's having so much fun, he's providing the best sound bites, of anyone on the team.
Yeah, for sure. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk more with Vinny Benedetto from the Gazette about the Nuggets season. I want to get his thoughts on the rest of the way for the Nuggets in this, what is now less than a quarter of a season remaining. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I want to tell you that football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Not just basketball, BetOnline.net's your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets with Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette. Vinny, I'll ask you this in pretty straightforward fashion. What is the biggest challenge in your mind for the Denver Nuggets the rest of this season?
I think it's figuring out what the playoff rotation is going to look like and managing that, just in terms of they're playing really pretty solid basketball right now, considering all of the guys they're playing without. And, everything is trending towards a Michael Porter Jr. return, and Jamal Murray, to me, it seems more iffy on what his timeline is going to look like. So I think the biggest issue is realizing how you're just going to handle the minutes, in terms of they found something with the second unit. I think is pretty, I feel pretty strongly about that they found something. So what happens with if Michael comes back, who moves out of the starting lineup? And, if it's Jeff Green, who I think is a safe assumption, how does that impact the dynamic between JaMychal and Boogie on the bench? And just all of these kind of tinkering with the rotation and all of the kind of secondary effects that might have, I think is going to be something kind of interesting to navigate in the final, 21 games of the regular season.
Yeah. Do you think that they can run a Jeff Green, JaMychal Green, DeMarcus Cousins lineup? Do you think that can function? The Jeff and J-Mike, or as I called it, Dos Verdes lineup was so bad to start the season, and splitting them up seemed to have helped quite a bit. Do you feel like there's any that they can get away now with Boogie? Does that help fix some of those issues? I like JaMychal at 4. I like Jeff Green at 3. Theoretically, it should work. Do you think they can get away with playing Jeff at 3, JaMychal 4, DeMarcus at 5?
That strikes me as tough just because I think then you've got it's one of those another change down the line where removing Austin from that equation. I think he's provided value as kind of a perimeter defender that I'm not sure who would be asked to pick up that kind of slack in that second unit when you've got, I don't think Bones or Bryn are very are strong options, I guess, at shutting down some of those scorers off opposing benches. So I guess I'd be surprised if that was something that they could really hang their hat on in the playoffs as an option, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gets explored, I guess.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a little bit more open to Austin being 6th man. I guess if Jamal comes back, 7th man. So it's like Monte and Austin, and then you use Bones and Bryn depending on what you need. If you need to get like some sort of spark and a little bit of, jitterbug, kind of firebug, get into the lane.
That's what they asked Marcus Howard to do last year.
Right. So pretty big upgrade, honestly. Love Marcus, but that's pretty good upgrade. And then if you need like a pure shooter, you've got Bryn to kind of fill in there. It'll just be interesting. I like the idea of if they have to have wings, like if they're going up against a team with a lot of size, I do like the idea of having the option to go to. Like I actually kind of want to see a Jeff, JaMychal, DeMarcus lineup. But it's going to depend on like what the matchup is, obviously. I mean, I think that's the end kind of result here. It does get really crowded all of a sudden for a team that's had so many problems trying to field, enough guys this season. If they get all 5 starters back, Monte's going to play. I think at this point, DeMarcus has to play. So that's 7. And then I think it gets into like where you're like, you're not going to not play Jeff Green. He's been so good. So that's 8. Okay. You can't really go much further. And then like 9 becomes like Bones, Bryn Forbes, maybe, and JaMychal. Like that I think is kind of like where it kind of works out to. That rotation, you're right, does get really cramped if those guys get back.
Yeah, that'll be something to monitor. And I'm also curious how much of a runway Mike and Jamal would need to kind of I have to imagine both would be on heavy minutes restrictions for a while. And then what does it look like in terms of potentially reintroducing those guys into a rotation when you've got 5 or 10 games left of the regular season? Because I think you need to give them a pretty long runway in terms of if you're going to expect what we've come to expect from them.
I would think so. Not the impression I've been given. The impression I've been giving is like when they're ready, they're ready. And this, look, this could work out magically well, right? It could all snap together in a very comfortable and fine way. The more likely scenario is that there's going to be some bumps in the road. Like that's another thing I wanted to ask you about is what do you think? They're going to struggle to get everybody back. I just think that they're having to reacclimate to being an entirely different team. In those situations, I kind of worry more about the starters than the bench because I feel like the bench is at least like the bench has honestly been through enough that now I'm like, yeah, the bench knows. Like the bench has gone through enough trouble. I think they figured out how to play together. The starters, honestly, and we've seen a few issues lately from the starters. Throwing or MPJ and Jamal back in, I think is going to cause even further concerns. Are you worried more? I guess here's a question. Are you worried more on the offensive or defensive end when those guys get back in the rotation?
That is a good question. I would lean towards defense just in terms of more communication and kind of discipline. And I think offensively, it's easier just to have an understanding of who you're playing with and their strengths and weaknesses. But it's also, you go back to last season, it was like we got 8 to 10 games after the Aaron Gordon trade where they were kind of at their peak form with the starting, with that starting 5. And it was just like, we had such a small sample size of it last year. And then like, what does it look like again this year? If we're trying to just put those guys back together, like there isn't like a huge basis or foundation of, intimately understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I just think maybe that would show itself more defensively than it would offensively. And Nikola makes everything pretty easy offensively.
I've been having a fight with Nuggets fans over the last day on Twitter because there was a lot of last night's game caused a lot of stress. People were very, very stressed out about the loss to the Thunder, and I keep trying to be like, I understand this is frustrating. It really is meaningless. I know that doesn't feel good. I know that you don't want to act like this loss is forgettable and that feels like letting them off the hook. But I really am just like, guys, the starters could not hit water if they fell out of a boat, and the Thunder play great. And sometimes this just kind of happens. In your seasons on the beat, have you kind of what's the biggest takeaway from like the rhythm of the regular season that you found? Although you've had some very weird rhythms to your regular seasons so far.
Yeah, it is interesting just in terms of like the concept of schedule losses is not something that like I had really encountered covering like, college basketball has you're going to maybe play once midweek and again on the weekend. So this in terms of factoring in travel and back-to-backs and flights and just, I think scheduling maybe has an underrated component when we look at the standings at the end of the season, just in terms of, I mean, the Nuggets had a brutal the first half of the season with all the travel, and it's impossible to, I think, create an entirely equitable schedule, but it's a bigger factor than I think I would have anticipated coming in.
Yeah, everyone kind of thinks like, well, you play 82 games the same way as everybody else, and you play your conference opponents 3 to 4 times, and you play the other conference 2 times. Everybody plays everybody. How could it be unbalanced? And I'm like, no, it's if you're the Nuggets and you face the toughest part of your schedule when you are at your worst, because that's when you suffered injuries, that's going to disproportionately impact. Like there's been teams that have suffered injuries, but then caught lighter schedules. Like the Bulls did this when they were really shorthanded in December. They had a really easy schedule, and that helped them go along. Like the NBA is so much to try and keep track of from a contextual standpoint, and that's team by team, let alone like trying to track all 30. It's a lot to try and keep your mind around. One more for you here on the rotations and the rest of the season. Are you of the mindset that they need to get, when you look at the playoffs, are you more confident in their ability to beat, let's say, Utah, or let's go ahead and say Memphis? It could be Golden State, but let's say between Memphis and Utah, who's the matchup that you think is a little bit better for them?
I think I would pick Utah. Just Ja is kind of having this. He's taken the leap into superstardom and being, a top whatever guy in the NBA. Right. I think he's there, and I think he's the kind of guy that the Nuggets really kind of struggle with. And Donovan Mitchell, I think, presents some of that with Utah. But I think there's just been there have been, can we say, cracks in Utah's foundation this year?
Yeah,
and I think with the Nuggets history, with the 3-1 comeback, I think there is some kind of psychological edge there in play. And people might point to, and this kind of goes back to our scheduling conversation with Utah in terms of, Michael Malone had said it how many times. They played Utah 4 times this year. I think lost all of them. 3 of them won a back-to-back. And so it's like, if the Nuggets get another healthy body or 2 back, I think I would be more comfortable with Utah, and I'm giving Ja too much credit, but I think this playoffs might be a special moment for him, and I'm just not sure I would want to be on the other side of that.
He's been incredible, and I keep waiting for him to cool off, and he just won't. So hard to blame you on that one. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll wrap up our conversation with Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette. We'll cover that, and we'll talk a little bit more about his thoughts on the roster when we get back on Locked On Nuggets. But first, I got to tell you about Rock Auto. The ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's impossible for your local store to pack all the parts that you need into their building. And that means you're going to have these conversations where you're trying to figure out which exact part you need. And no, they don't have this one. They got to order from another store. You'll be in on Tuesday. It's a big hassle. Don't mess with that. Just go to rockauto.com. You've got that access to that at home or in your pocket. You get to save time and money when using Rock Auto. You're going to spend sometimes 100% more on parts if you use one of these big chain stores rather than rockauto.com. A Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store. It's just $216 from Rock Auto. It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer. They got everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Just write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets, finishing up with Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette. Thanks to Vinny for taking some time with me on a Thursday before the Nuggets take on the Houston Rockets on Friday. Vinny, I want to ask you, what's been your biggest surprise from a player standpoint this season about this team? Like, what was a guy that's kind of that you've really been surprised at their performance this season, good or bad?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the obvious answer with Nikola, just in terms of
pretty good start.
I've kind of looked at this season as just like a basketball stress test. Like, how much can we put on this guy's shoulders? How much can he really handle? And the answer appears to be like just about anything, from a basketball standpoint. So that's the obvious answer. And then going back to that Bones feature I wrote preseason, writing it, I was just kind of like, he'd shown flashes, but I was still like, am I hyping up this rookie that we haven't seen play in a regular season game too much? And I've been really pleasantly surprised for the value he's provided as the 26th pick coming in as a rookie. I think that's one. And I'm a Zeke Naji believer, I guess you could say. I think obviously we haven't got to see him lately, but I think he's kind of taken steps forward that have been meaningful in kind of showing that he's kind of got some 3-and-D value, but also we saw him, I think, take steps forward inside in the post. Not huge leaps, but I think he's starting to gain a little confidence or strength around the rim, which I think is important. So I would say those three have been my biggest surprises. On a negative side, I think it kind of has to be JaMychal Green, just given what went down to start the season. He's really turned it around recently, and I think that's been a big part of the second unit's kind of resurgence, is him playing with a little bit more confidence in his shot or playing more freely with Boogie at the 5. So I'd say those 4 guys would be the biggest surprises, both positively and negatively for me.
Who's your favorite quote on the team?
Ooh, I'm going to go with Austin Rivers. Just he's given us so much dating back to last season, and it's just almost, it can turn into like a stream of consciousness kind of thing, where it's like someone poses him a question and he can take it for 2.5, 3 minutes and just wind you through, everything he's experienced and everything he's thinking at different points. I think he's kind of more insightful than maybe he gets credit for.
I like him. I like Jeff Green. There's a bunch of good quotes on this team, honestly, at this point. DeMarcus has been oddly gracious with us. He does not have a tremendous history of being gracious with the media, but he's also at a very different point in his career. I've been really great. I've been thankful that DeMarcus has shared as much as he has with us. I miss Jamal. Jamal was a really good quote. He could be acerbic with it, and he likes to mess with us, but I kind of miss that. Like, it's nice to have that kind of balance. Like, Joker's always very congenial, and like his jokes are very lighthearted. I kind of miss Jamal's crankiness, honestly, a little bit of the time. Miss Paul Millsap, he was a really good quote. I am hopeful that we get to actually talk to more players in the playoffs, because I would like to I especially, like, it's weird, like, I just don't know Zeke, don't know him at all, just have not been able to know anything about him, and that's like a very weird thing if you're covering this team night by night.
Right. Yeah. And Zeke is very, I'd say, almost calculated, where he's intentional, I think, in the words he uses, and is very careful. I would be very curious what's kind of beyond the shell there with him. And I on the Murray stuff, like, I've only interacted with him via Zoom. So I am like blank slate when it comes to media scrums with him in person. So I am very hopeful that is something I will get to experience here.
Oh man, scrums! Imagine scrums. I went to a movie the other night, and I was thinking about wearing a mask, and then I eventually was like, no, like, CDC said it's fine. The case rates are really low. I'm gonna go without. So, like, I watched a movie in a theater with people without a mask on. It was very weird. I was nervous about it, but I was also like, oh, this is like a thing I used to do, like, all the time. There's a lot of that going on right now, and so I'm hopeful that we can get back to some of that with the NBA. I'm fine if we don't have locker room access back, honestly. I'm okay if they don't. Like, if you ask me, do you get anything out of the locker room? The answer is yes. Like, in my opinion, just being able to walk in the room and sense the mood is huge. You get such a good sense for how a team took a win or a loss based off of how they are in the locker room. I've gone into losing locker rooms that were loose and fun and I've gone into losing locker rooms that were too loose, where it was like, you should probably be a little upset And the fact that you're not says a little bit about where you're at in the season. But I've also gone to like winning locker rooms that were very business-like. It just helps get you a better sense of it. But even if that's not the case, I just think like even if we have just like a staging area, anything where we can get, I am just really tired of all of us sharing one question a piece at most with two guys. It's when you're trying to cover a team and get to know it inside and out, and especially the players are all. This is what's ironic. If you ask any of the players' union representatives what they want more from the media, it's always we want to be treated like humans. We want to be more than just an athlete. We want to be treated like people and given respect and consideration. And my response on some of this is, okay, it's very hard to do that if we never actually have like a face-to-face conversation with you. Like that's the thing, right? So the dynamic, I think, is
like humans do.
Do what?
I said if we don't interact like humans typically do.
Exactly. So, final question for you. What's something that you do? Oh, I have two final questions for you. What's something that you do when you're not scribbling about the Nuggets?
Ooh, that's a good question. I run a lot. That's probably like a very basic Colorado answer. But I'm also like liable to be rewatching HBO series at any point. Probably The Wire or Sopranos. Those are go-tos of mine. Run. Big soccer fan.
Have you been to a Rapids game?
I cover the Rapids as well, actually. So, I was at the.
I should have caught that. I have you in my vital list, but I haven't caught that. Going to a Rapids game was honestly like outside of the I like Avalanche games the most. But I had so much fun when I went to a Rapids game. It's such a great atmosphere.
Yeah, and I feel like people are kind of missing out a little bit just because the stadium location is not ideal for a lot of people, or it's hard to get out there. If you're having a couple drinks, enjoying the match, you're a ways from downtown. So I think it's an underrated experience, but it's also not the easiest or most convenient for a lot of people who want to have a night out.
Well, we'll see. That they might be becoming a little bit more necessary here in the coming years, given certain purchases by the Kroenke family. My final question for you: in your Twitter profile, your background image is, by the way, your profile image is incredible because you have short hair, which I don't remember ever seeing you with, and an incredible mustache. And then on your Twitter background, it's a concert. What concert is on your Twitter background?
Can I say the A word here?
Yes.
Joey Badass. He's a rapper from New York, and it was, can't remember if it was at the Ogden or the Fillmore, but it was there. It was a night I drove up from the Springs. He's like one of my favorite musical artists, and it was just me by myself at the concert, and just I needed something that I actually owned. I didn't want to face any like copyright issues if I snagged a photo of something else that I really liked, and I'm not a talented photographer. So that was like baseline. It's decent. It works. It gives people some insight into who I am without advertising it, blatantly.
That's Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette. You can check him out on Twitter at V Benedetto, 1 N, 1 D, 2 T's. V Benedetto. Make sure to follow him. There'll be a link in the profile or the description for this episode as well. Check him out there. All of his great Nuggets coverage as well as the Rapids coverage, which I will definitely be trying to catch more of because I really like the Rapids and think they're very interesting. Vinny, thanks so much for coming on Locked On Nuggets.
Awesome. I had a blast, Matt. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back on tomorrow night. I'll have post-game reaction from the Rockets show. It'll be probably a late show, so if you were trying to catch this on YouTube, which you should subscribe to the YouTube channel immediately. Make sure to stay up late for that. I will be doing that after I get done with the NBA bet stream, so I'll catch up on the Rockets game, and then we'll do a live reaction. Hopefully, it will not be a complete meltdown from the Nuggets Nation. If it is, I'll try and get everybody through on back-to-back games that they probably should win, that maybe they won't. We'll see what happens. And then we'll be back on Sunday night after the Pels game. Adam should be back for that one. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Make sure to have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll see you guys again next time on Locked On Nuggets.